Okay, dear colleagues, let's start this seminar. Today we have the second seminar, consultation research seminar led by Professor Linda Cook. And today we will discuss the media studies area and more concretely about Russia's special path idea that is discussed and constructed by mass media during the last several decades. So what does it mean to have its special path for the country, and what are the main discourses and their peculiarities during the recent years? Today this is our topic, and as in previous time, Linda will begin by introducing some more broader areas of interest in this regard, and then Polina will share her findings, and then the floor will be open for everybody to ask questions, give comments. Also, Linda would provide her comments and questions, and everybody is welcome to join and participate. Thank you very much. And Linda, please, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. So this is a very interesting paper. Let me just, the special path discourse in framing political news about sanctions in Russia. And so I'm first, as Elena said, going to speak a little bit about, in general, what framing is, how it differs from agenda setting, and what are some of the arguments about why frames are used, the conditions under which they may or may not be effective in influencing the way that readers or consumers perceive and understand issues. So framing presents compelling stories and images that shape broad, I'm sorry, okay. Excuse me just a minute. Okay, I'm sorry, I had the wrong. Okay, so framing is a theory of mass communication, and it refers to how media packages and presents information to the public. According to the theory, the media highlights certain events. So first, media does two things. First, it sets the agenda. So media first tells the reader what issues are important. It focuses their attention on particular issues. These issues may or may not be ones that really directly affect their lives, but media kind of communicates to people what they should consider important, about what issues they should be informed. The world is so complicated, people have to have ways, and journalists and politicians have to have ways of choosing and organizing information, in particular choosing that which is most important to them. So according to the theory, the media highlights certain events and then places them in a particular context that will either encourage or discourage certain interpretations. And this way, media exercises a selective influence over how people view reality. There was an anthropologist named Gregory Bateson who is credited with first positing this theory, although a man named Goffman is usually the first who's pointed to. But it's a theory that comes from anthropology, from literature about how people communicate, how they create meanings, create collective meanings, create mutual understandings. The basis of framing theory is that media first focuses attention on certain events and then places them within a field of meaning. So the major premise is that an issue can be viewed from a variety of perspectives. You can be told about a particular issue and And then the media can try to convince you to view it in one way, or perhaps not to view it in another way that may already be out there in the stratosphere. Framing refers to the process by which people develop or are led to particular conceptualizations of an issue, or that reorients their thinking about the issue. So framing theory suggests how something influences the choices people make about how to process the information that they're given. They are really abstractions that work to organize or structure meaning and influence perceptions. So the most frames are used in many different ways in life. We all have frames that we bring to our understandings of daily life, but the most common use of frames is in communication, as it is used in Polina's paper, to frame the news or media to frame the news or media that they convey. So they accomplish this by introducing news items within predefined and narrow contextualizations. Frames can be designed to enhance understanding. They can be used as cognitive shortcuts to link stories to a bigger picture. Frames are a way of organizing everyday reality by providing meaning to an unfolding strip of events and promoting particular definitions and interpretations of political settings. So framing is in many ways tied closely to agenda setting theory. Both focus on how media draws the public's eyes to specific topics. In this way, they set the agenda. But framing takes a step beyond simply telling people what should be interesting to them or what is important in their political world, and also tells them how they should understand it, how they should interpret it. They not only tell the audience what to think about, but also how to think about the issue. They define and construct any piece of communicated information. Now, the paper raises but doesn't entirely address the question, how much influence does framing have? In any society, somebody is producing media, and the journalists or the owners or somebody frames the issues at hand. In Russia, the government plays the major role in framing information. But there is a question, how much influence does framing actually have? Can it, or when can it convince people how to view issues, influence their understanding, and when might it fail to influence that understanding? So audiences may interpret information through their own frames, which may or may not overlap with the media's frames. If people may have experience that gives them information about the issue at hand. So, for example, with sanctions, if people are told, well, there are sanctions on Russia, but they're not really affecting the economy because the government has managed to find new markets for our goods and new markets to buy all the consumer goods we need. So we're managing the issue, and it isn't really having any effects, any serious effects on the Russian consumer market. But people may know, and this is all hypothetical, people may know that when they go to the shops, there are a lot of products they can't find, or they can't find the types or quality that they did in the past. So it may be more difficult. It may be difficult to convince people, though one may frame sanctions as being an imposition on Russia with which the government has dealt effectively and protected the population from any negative effects. If in fact people have experienced negative effects, their experience will contradict the frame, and it is much less likely to convince them to create legitimacy, to structure their understanding of the issue of sanctions. On the other hand, if in this paper, there is an aspect of the issue about which people have very little information. For example, Polina's paper is about how the media explains the motivations of foreign actors of the United States, the European Union, in imposing sanctions on Russia. Now, that is the question of the motivations of foreign actors is one about which audiences in Russia, in most countries, have no direct information. They don't have access, they don't read the direct statements and arguments. And so that they don't really know from the experiences of their own lives why these sanctions are being imposed, or they know some simplified version of it. In a case in which the audience does not have a lot of information to interpret a particular policy, there's a much greater likelihood that framing it in a particular way in media will influence their understanding and therefore influence their attitudes toward government, the legitimacy of the government. So if the frame is the one in the paper is about motivations of which readers have no direct knowledge, it's more likely to be convincing. The paper doesn't really assess whether, we'll go to that later, doesn't really assess whether the frames are convincing, but I think it could. So frames are reinforced every time they're evoked, whether positively or negatively. And as you see from the paper, the frames around sanctions are evoked again and again. In fact, they have several different dimensions that Polina structures very well, and then shows how each of those dimensions, Russia's place in the world, its relationship with other countries, its leadership, each of these dimensions of the frames is repeated often, even in this one media channel, the Channel 1 News, and that also makes it more likely to be convincing. Frames are systems of preconceived ideas used to organize and interpret new information. So politicians who want to introduce a new frame to audiences must reference culturally popular ideas. That is, their frames have to have some connection, if not to what people know, then at least to their general ways of thinking about the world. So culturally popular frames link the existing arguments in a compelling way. So the use, which Polina shows, of concepts of Russian civilization, of a strong leader, these are familiar concepts that are there in the stratosphere of Russian culture and have been for a long time. And frames are more likely to be convincing when they are connected, not necessarily with what people know directly, but with their general ideas about what values matter, with conceptions that are familiar to them. Frames that just come out of the blue and talk about explanations that no one has ever thought about or that don't connect with any familiar ideas would be much less likely to convince. Now, Polina doesn't talk about whether the special path, so we know that the ideas of the special path, that not only are they represented in state policies, but to some extent they're present in the minds of Russian citizens. Public opinion research shows that a number of these concepts are familiar to people. What makes frames so powerful is how easily they're evoked and therefore reinforced. The only way to combat a frame is to reframe an issue in another, more powerful way. Now, again, these issues really, they juxtapose two frames, the media at which Polina is looking. They first bring what we might call the Western frame, that the sanctions are being imposed because of Russian behavior. And then they bring to that a different frame, which says that the West is going to punish Russia no matter what it does to preserve its distinctive civilization. It's not responding just to particular behavior. Therefore, it's not really the fault of any of the leadership's policies. So frames can be in conflict with one another, and that is the case throughout this paper. A frame can be combated with another frame that's more powerful. Framing can cause audiences to deflect responsibility for solving social and political problems away from elected leaders. So even if people are suffering from sanctions, if they become convinced that that these sanctions are not a result of poor choices of their leaders, but a result of any kind of civilization defending policy that their leadership chooses, then the responsibility goes to other actors. Framing theory is used by communication professionals to help move audiences toward a certain belief. And I'm just going to speak very briefly about the three theorists. Two of them are also introduced in the paper, who are the main theorists of framing, and then we will go on to the paper. So the Irving Goffman is the person who is usually credited with having proposed this theory in 1974, although again, it did really come out of anthropology sooner than that. So Goffman said that people interpret what's going on around them through frames. He conceptualized the idea of frames, and he went on to clarify that frames greatly influence how data is interpreted, processed, and communicated. So he was the basic theorist. That another man named Entman, who came later, talked about political uses of framing. He said political powers make efforts to promote their interests by persistently setting frames on mediated communication, and that's universal. Elites presumably care about what people think because they want them to behave in certain ways to support the elite's decisions. Shaping citizens' opinions about political issue and events is one of the major techniques of governing. And then there's just one more man, a man named McCombs, who talked about the fact that, let's see, that framing incorporates a wide range of factors, relying on cognitive concepts. Again, the idea which I already expressed, that frames are tied in with culture in macro societal structures, and that their ties to culture are part of what makes them effective. So I think that if we could move on to Polina's paper, then some of these ideas are quite abstract, but she places them very well into an empirical framework, and so I think it would be useful to go on to the paper at this point.
So thank you, Professor Cook. So I guess I can demonstrate the presentation. Okay, so can you see the presentation? Yeah. Okay, nice. Yes. So actually, what was Professor Linda Cook also mentioning is that the thing that I'm not mentioning in this paper about the actual influence of the frames, yeah, on the attitudes of Russian citizens towards sanctions. But this is kind of like the topics that I continue with after this paper. Yeah, so I have another one, a separate project, which was on influence of the frames of the frame, special past discourse frame on the attitudes towards sanctions, and then implement like another kind of methodologies there. Yeah, but so this one was kind of an exploratory research just to look at how these frames are actually like portrayed and transmitted through the media. So what is the background is in general about Russia's special pass as an idea. So this is quite not a new one. It was actually like developed like something like around maybe even 100 years ago, yeah. But it became particularly kind of like re-evoked after the collapse of USSR, yeah, because it is connected to the thing that the old identity of Soviet people was kind of just destroyed, yeah, but the new one has not yet emerged. So this kind of like civilizational new Russian identity as like some kind of like special country in the world order or have emerged. And what it highlights is notion of cultural distinctiveness, historical mission, which is important in the context of other countries, also imperialism, orthodoxy, also Eurasian essence and non-Western character, because one of the most important points here was the kind of difference between Russia as special civilization, different civilization, and Western world, which was especially quite shown in the media coverage of sanctions. And also this idea, according to some previous research, influenced formation of political orientations and connected to mass perception of Russia's place in the modern world. So as previous research highlighted, which Professor Cook also mentioned, that it is somehow represented already in the minds of Russian citizens. And it was kind of re-emerged since 2014, though I would say that maybe a little bit earlier as well. So what was my research problem? Why I choose this particular idea is because, well, quite a lot of research on the Russian special pass already exists, but the most focus in this research was in the development of idea, historically, its interpretation in authorities discourse, so based on the analysis of different policies, also manifestation of the idea in foreign policy, also based on the analysis of different documents related to foreign policy, and perception and public opinion. So this was mostly connected to public opinion polls. However, as we know, that mass media also contribute to public consensus on different political issues, and they may help to legitimize and be used to legitimize policies both in domestic and in foreign sector. However, this is as well lack of research on media and media frames in non-democratic environments. So it is not quite clear actually how frames work in non-democratic environment, in non-democratic media fields. But the difference is due to different media systems that exist in more democratic and less democratic states. Okay, and the case was chosen about the sanctions is because, in the 2014, when the Ukrainian crisis started to unfold, the public opinion polls demonstrated that Russian citizens were not really influenced by the consequences of economic sanctions from their perspective. So they said that, okay, well, sanctions are not really good, but it does not influence our everyday life, so we're fine. And also, as previous research demonstrated, that media coverage of sanctions policy, also the one of the research was conducted on this quite similar data. When media frame sanctions policy a non-problematic issue, so it may contribute to the development of such attitudes in Russian society. Also, I suggest here that framing news about Russian sanctions, anti-Russian sanctions, and also counter-sanctions that Russia impose as an answer to Western countries may also help to create its consensus about sanctions policy, and also legitimize counter sanctions that Russia imposed on the Western countries. So my theoretical framework, as was mentioned before, is basically framing in mostly. So I guess I can skip this part, because Professor Cook already quite clearly explained what framing means. Okay. So my data was the analysis was based on the analysis of Vesti Nedeli, News of the Week broadcast, which a show which is broadcasted on Russia 1, which is a state channel, a state TV channel, and this was the weekly news broadcasted on Sunday evenings. So I analyzed the period from March 16, 2014. So this was the first mention of the sanctions which were like connected to Crimean crisis. And till August 2019, so since I conducted this research like quite a long time ago, yeah, so this is like, that is why the end of the period of analysis is 2019, but I hope I will be able also to continue to working on this project, yeah, and analyze some later news pieces as well. And I also kind of like implemented the approach of critical discourse analysis developed by Fairclough. But also what was really helpful is Florian Topfel's work on discourse analysis of media in non-democratic regimes, and like according both to the ideas, like the idea is the components of the idea of Russian special past, and also to Fairclough's critical discourse analysis, and combining it with Topfel's approach. So here were like four main like components that I derived, and which I which I focused on in my analysis. So there were the essence of Russian civilization. Yeah, so Russia is some kind of distinct civilization which is not similar to other countries. Also, its place in the world order, also the relationship between Russia and foreign states, and the role of political leader in policy implementation, and basically like in the development of counter sanctions, and like as the answer to anti-Russian sanctions. So I will provide here just some of the citations from the news pieces which I analyzed, and let's start from the first one, the essence of Russian civilization. So basically, the first issue was actually referring to Russia as a civilization, which is quite different, and which is, of course, threatened by the West. And by the West, both the USA and the European Union countries are mentioned. So you can see the citations on the slide, so I will not read them. But the main issue here is that, as already was also mentioned, yeah, the reason for like imposition of sanctions was not in the in the actions of Russia, yeah, towards Ukraine, but it was something that is kind of led by the desire of like the Western states to prevent Russia being a different civilization, and also kind of the sanctions were portrayed as the price for like natural, as it says, desire of like Russian states to preserve it as a nation, as a civilization. So these kind of like actions towards Ukraine and Crimea were portrayed in general as like something natural that should have happened anyways. Yeah, so this is not basically the the responsibility of the government. Yes, this is how like natural naturally the country moves, yeah, towards like being a nation. And also a great opposition between Russian and Western values were proposed here. And what was interesting is that actually in some of the pieces, it was said that, well, Western values, and especially the values of Europe, are not in its foundation, they are not that much different from Russian, but they were kind of like corrupted. They were kind of like misunderstood by Europe, by the Westerners, and this is how there was like nothing left of this the European values no more. And also the thing was that well, no country is actually able to tell Russia what the norms and what the values should be for Russian citizens, for Russian state, because Russia, as a distinct civilization, has its own right to have its own values, which are different from the Western. Okay, so as to the place of Russia in the world order, this was also like something which was quite obvious, yeah, is what and connected to this like hegemony of USA. But also what was highlighted is that this kind of like bipolar world was changing, and it was changing towards and moving towards multipolar, and Russia, together with China and India, were in the were kind of the actors that could resist USA's influence on the world in general. And this is also explained from the point of view legitimization of sanctions, is that USA was trying to act as a hegemonic country, and this is how and this is why they imposed sanctions in general. Yeah, not because Russia did something wrong, but because this was the way of the USA to to make their influence on the world even like bigger and even higher. So as for European states, which this was quite an interesting idea reflected in this news, in Besti Недели, that actually European states such as like France, Germany, and others, they were not independent, and they are not really the enemies of Russia to some extent, but they are just like as well suffering from USA's desire to be like #1 in the world. And this is why they also like stand against Russia. Yeah, it is not their desire, but this is how, as you can see, like in this citation, like USA like rapes the Europe and makes it like to stand against Russia, and Europe and European countries here are portrayed as some kind of like victims to United States like desires and hegemonic plans. So as to relationship between Russia and foreign states as well, sanctions are named to be some kind of strategy that actually help Western countries, and especially the US, expand their influence in the international arena. So once again, there is the idea that no matter what Russia does, I mean, in terms of foreign policies, still West will be trying to prevent Russia from development, to prevent Russia from gaining more influence in the international arena, and this is and the sanctions are just kind of an excuse, and the Crimean crisis was kind of an excuse for what like the West and the European and the USA like do to Russia in terms of sanctions. Quite logically, the answer using the counter sanctions is not that Russia kind of like is an aggressor as well, and Russia is trying to like attack foreign countries with these counter sanctions, is that Russia just defends itself, this is how Russia is portrayed as some kind of like a victim with no choice except for imposition of counter sanctions. And also another interesting issue here was the mentioning of opposition as the fifth column, because it is not only like Western countries, Western states that want to kind of destroy Russia and not let it develop and gain power and influence, but also the enemies inside of Russia. Here, this kind of like the fifth column, and also some names were provided here. They helped the US and the EU choose people who were like under the sanctions, so that the fifth column, knowing Russia better from the inside, could consult Western states in giving them some kind of information about like which kind of like sanctions and which kind of people sanctioned would be like the most kind of like painful for Russia. Okay. And the last part is about the role of political leader in policy implementation, because actually, like, having a strong leader is one of the also main like components of Russia's special path, yeah, because it is kind of like connected. It is kind of connected, yeah, to the differences with West, yeah, because Western countries, they are like democratic, yeah, as this discourse claims, and they are like prone like to choose the leader, yeah. But Russia is different. Russia is distinct civilization, so Russia needs like a strong leader who would like be leading the country for quite a long time, which is like happening actually right now. And also that is how through the sanctions and through this discourse of special pass, the rule of the political leader is also legitimized. And he is portrayed from the two points of view. First, from the point of view of foreigners, who, like, according to this news that I analyzed, also like really like President Putin, who also think that actually he is one of the most influential politicians in the world. They support his agenda, they support his ways of acting. And the problem is not in the citizens of Western countries. The problem is in the government of Western countries here. And also public support is also showed here, like internal public support, which is also based not only on like the course of actions of the political leader itself, but also this support is attributed to the personality and to the style of governments, which is also important. This kind of like charismatic leadership, yeah, as we would say. So in this case, Putin is like he is opposed to Western political leaders, yeah, and he is portrayed as like really strong, but also really caring, yeah, about his own country, also like really smart, and also like the one who's trying to preserve peace in the world, and also the one who is actually like genuinely caring about his foreign partners, yeah. If we compare it to the image of that time President Barack Obama, which was portrayed on the opposite. Also later Trump was mentioned, yeah, because the period of analysis was from 14 to 19. With Trump, the story was a little bit different, yeah, because in the beginning of Trump's term, he was not seen, like, he was seen as maybe like a positive change, yeah, for Russia. And this is why in the beginning of this media coverage, he was portrayed much more positively, and his continuation of the sanctions, of anti-Russian sanctions, was attributed to also like inability to choose the direction of foreign policy, because this was something that he inherited from Obama. So he did not have much choice how to lift the sanctions, yeah. And this is like how he was portrayed, like comparing to President Obama. So just in conclusion, yeah, Russia was basically like, it was actually portrayed as civilization, and it has to protect itself from the West's assaults, yeah. And Russia was also portrayed a little bit as a victim, yeah, but the victim who can stand for itself and should stand for itself. Also, sanctions imposed by the West were seen as the retribution for Russia's like natural desire to persist as a civilization. So this was not the consequence of Russia's actions towards Ukraine. It was the consequence of this kind of fundamental difference between like Russia and the West. Also, growing influence of Russia in the international arena. And was the reason for this like intentions of the West to impose sanctions and to undermine like Russia's sovereignty. And this is how anti-Russian sanctions were explained and how counter-sanctions were also legitimized. Economic sanctions were pictured as the best answer to Russian economic and political development. And also its increasing like power, its increasing influence on the international politics. And counter-sanctions, yes, they were legitimized as some kind of like natural reaction of Russian governments, which the aim of which was to defend the country from external threats, and also to as a tool to kind of maintain the independence from like Western world, Western culture, and also as a tool to maintain or not only like economic independence, but also independence in terms of values and in terms of norms of behavior, like in Russian society in general. So, okay, thank you for your attention. So I guess that's okay. Yeah, I guess that now I can like answer some questions. Yeah, so.
Yes, dear colleagues, who would like to ask some questions or give some comments, please?
If I may.
Yes, sure.
In fact, the questions that I had when reading the the article were resolved by Polina's speech and her report. There is one suggestion left and some kind of judgment. Obviously, this kind of research is extremely important and of great interest, practical interest, maybe, at least answering the question that arises from a person who is not immersed in the current Russian discursive space. How did it happen, and why do Russians support this way of destroying their own country and others? However, modern Russian media haven't invented anything new at all. All these discursive practices were used symmetrically. For example, during the Cold War, starting with the actual symmetrical speeches of Churchill and Stalin in 1946 and later. But it's not a point of my question. My question is not the question, but the suggestion is connected with other part of this text and of this speech. It seems to me that that in order to form a complete picture of what is happening in Russia today, it's necessary, in addition to what you have highlighted, to consider those aspects of the discourse that are aimed at establishing and maintaining of dictatorship and the domestic policy of the Russian Federation. You mentioned the topic of the internal enemies, but maybe somehow in passing. However, without this, the identification and elimination of these internal agents of dissent, the promotion of foreign policy intentions and the legitimation of current government would be impossible. And it seems to me that you could highlight this position in a special aspect of your article, to divide it in a special point.
Okay, Marina, thank you for a question, like a suggestion, I would say. So since my analysis was based on like some theoretical assumptions, previous to like actually empirical analysis, so that is why I did not put so much attention to this issue, because actually when I was reading articles which describe what is the main kind of like components, what is the main features of the idea of Russia special pass, they did not mention this kind of like internal enemies issue at all, which is interesting, I guess. And this is something that I found just from the data. So this is why I like tried to incorporate this this discussion over like this fifth column to one of the points that I was making, in this like four parts. But I guess, maybe if I would analyze my data from like more like open perspective, without making any kind of like theoretical assumptions about what kind of ideas I would meet, in the data, probably a little bit different picture would arise as well. But I decided to use this like theoretical frame, to focus on some aspects of the idea of Russia special path, because my aim was actually to see how this like idea, which has already like in this kind of formulation seen and analyzed by previous researchers in different like documents produced by Russian government, in the polls, opinion polls, how would it be like seen or not really seen in the media? So this is why I use this kind of approach. But of course, I guess this issue also deserves like maybe some more attention. And if I manage to like continue this work, with analyzing some new data, after the 2019, which I stopped at by the time of the research, maybe I would make like a little bit different approach, and find some new like topics on which I could like elaborate to like a little bit bigger extent, including this like idea about internal enemies, and why this kind of like the regime arose, and how it was related to this issue. Okay, I hope I managed to kind of like answer. Thank you. Some other questions?
Yes, I have a question. Thank you for your presentation, but you actually have a question in chat, but so maybe you want to answer the question from the chat, and then my question, because it was before me, or my question.
Okay, so I guess Maria, let me ask first your question, then from the chat.
Okay, thank you for your presentation. It's very interesting research, and I want to say that I'm not a specialist in a discourse analysis. So my question is about a thing that you already mentioned during your presentation, but I will ask. As I understood, the idea of special paths is created for explaining everything, to justify everything. So then why did you choose sanctions? Why sanctions is so illustrative in this context?
Okay, so I see the point here. Well, I choose the sanctions as a topic because it was interesting to see like how since this exact paper was just the beginning of my research, because actually it was aimed at looking at the frames and how they are how they are proposed like in the media, in order to after that to combine an article that would be like a stimulus in my experimental research, which I conducted a little bit later, which was based on this paper. The reason why I choose sanctions, because my final aim was to see how media frames influence the attitude of Russian citizens towards sanctions. So this was my second research. Because at that time when I conducted it, it was like one of the, I would say, hot topics first, and second, because of this interesting results of actually opinion polls, that it was quite obvious that anti-Russian sanctions had some negative consequences to Russian economy, but still people said that, well, we're fine, so it does not influence us that much actually, and this is why I wanted to focus on this topic, and I hope, I will also able to present maybe at some seminars later as the second part of this research, which is connected to the influence of the frames, this experimental part.
Okay, thank you.
So, and then the question from the chat, I guess, what methodological paradigms was used? So as my main framework, I used frame analysis, so frame in theory, and this in the beginning that led me to my methodological my methodology that I developed but also, as I mentioned before, critical discourse analysis, and also the approach to media discourse analysis by Florian Topfel. What about position of researcher in this government media's analysis? So of course, I tried to be as objective as possible, if that's what you're asking me. But I guess that my methodology helped me to stay in this more objective position towards the discourses. But of course, when we are analyzing discourses, when we're talking about discourses, the position of researcher influences somehow the results, but still our methodology is designed in a way to prevent it as much as possible, as I would say. So we're alone as Russian scholar. So if I understand it correctly, the question, so I was the only researcher who conducted this research. And what about the period? So since 2015 till 2019, so this was the period of my data analysis. So, but I also mentioned it during the presentation. Okay, I hope I also answered these 4 questions. So 14, 19. Okay, so any more? Alexander?
Polina, thank you for your good and quite fresh, even in our little bit modern time research. I want to ask you if you think is it possible to find the special structures from the state actors where you can check their discourse, how they elaborate discourse, and how they provide certain agenda to the media. I know that in St. Petersburg there is some departments in our parliament who are responsible for presenting PR and media for our governor. So maybe there are something like there is in Moscow, so for Sobyanin, and maybe they also have certain ideas about Russian path, and it may be the way to analyze it technically and practically in empirical phase.
Okay, Alexander, thank you for your question. So since I was analyzing the discourses on more on a federal channel, so this was not connected to some local governments as Russian or St. Petersburg's. but to like Russian government in general. The thing here is that, like in some previous research, already like just the speeches of Putin were analyzed using this approach. Also, some documents about foreign policies have already been analyzed as well. I do not actually like remember which one and what was these documents, but I just remember just like the approach in general. What else? Yeah, and also we could see like in this news and in some of the citations that I provided, it is not only the words of the presenter of the news analyzed, yeah, but also some citations from Putin himself, also some citations from other people from government, yeah, were analyzed. So this is also how the analysis of its implementation, if in like state discourse, can be conducted, I guess. But I did not divide this in any way. Yeah, it just like took everything together because I was focused like on the discourse, like in general. But I guess like maybe this can be like connected somehow to like presidential apparatus, probably, but I'm not sure that. But yeah, this is actually quite an interesting question, especially from not theoretical but practical point of view. Yeah, so I guess I would just like think about it a little bit more, as it is like quite difficult for me to answer it right now. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, dear Linda. Do you have comments or questions, or Elena Rostislavna? Or other?
Yes, I can say a few comments. I think this is a good paper. Thank you very much, Polina. It belongs, however, to the to mainstream of political science, which doesn't mean that I devalue your work, but it's always like, you know, from the sociological point of view, the political science is very rich and large and very powerful, but it always lacks some society or societal social links related with people's values, behavior, choices, some, I don't know, some consumption choices. Although at the same time, I think that special path is fun idea. So I mean, it is the idea that suits for all, perhaps, I don't know, because it seems on the one hand, it seems to be monopolized by political science. So if you try to look for a special path in welfare policy, in civil society, in whatever, I don't know, some traditional values or something like that, you will never find such literature. You will only find relations between Russia and foreign countries, foreign states, and so on and so forth. Why is it so? I mean, who set the limits? It's very interesting. At the same time, it is also interesting that this concept, this myth, ideological concept is not purely Russian. It belongs to any path. I mean, all countries that went through modernization, through imperialism, through especially like Germany since 19th century, and then through the 20th century is famous Sonderweg. You know, the same, it's the same meaning. I mean, the special path is Sonderweg, and it was not, it did not originate in the Second World War. It originated much earlier in 19th century. So it of course, it belongs to the development of nation state, and all this mythology and ideology of beautiful folk songs, folk culture, history, and so on. costumes, folk costumes, and so on. And I mean, every country, Museum of National History contains such a department about this period of history with special parts, because it would be always connected with so-called traditional culture and so on. And it always will be explained like it's a heart of a nation, identity, and so on. But then it seems like it goes to special parts, each direction of these stories. If we talk about cultural studies or sociology, it will go towards this values, ideas of identities, national identities. And if you go to political science, it will be called special paths. So I want, and this, my comment maybe is a dead end comment, because you have already written your paper. It's just because I lack in this paper, I lack the understanding of the attitudes of people, but maybe it's not your task. So, but still, it is like from another discipline. Maybe it's fine. But another point is, my other comment is the question, what is new in your research? What is the novelty of your research? Because you take Drobizheva's list of characteristics, I mean, list of features or variables, whatever, variables of special parts, and you like test this, not test, you don't test, you apply this matrix to an analysis of discourse on sanctions. And then, I mean, what is new? So, okay, it exists. Full point, full stop. But what is new? Maybe something changed. Maybe, I mean, what is the dynamics? Maybe there are some deviations. Maybe there are some contradictions. Maybe there are some, I don't know, some loops, I don't know, something that doesn't work as much as it did before. So this is actually, maybe I'm not from this field, but I feel that you could do it better. That's all. Okay. So, I mean, it's nice, it's fine, but maybe you could do a little more further steps here. Okay. Thank you very much.
You understand? Thank you for your question, like suggestion.
And I will send one book that you didn't cite.
Okay, thank you. So let me just like copy it until I lost like the chat, yeah. As I mentioned before, yeah, this like the idea of this research was like an exploratory, yeah, and this was used as a basis for my research, at which I aimed about how the framing actually influences like people's opinion about sanctions. So in that like second part, like much more new information was provided, because I also like connected it to the media use in general, yeah, and this was like my main like independent variables. But in this case, yeah, for this particular paper, I would say that of course, yes, my main like aim was to look at like particular discourses from which I could make an example for this like stimulus article, which I used further. But as well as we discussed, like when Maria Andreevna asked me about the question about like the fifth column, yeah, this was something new to the discourse, which was not mentioned before in the previous literature. And also, of course, yes, since this paper has already been written, but I still think that I would like to make some kind of like additional data analysis to complete this one, yeah, because this is, I would say, just like the draft of the paper. And of course, I think I will just try to analyze it from like more like open point of view, to look at maybe some differences which were not mentioned in the articles which focused on the analysis of documents, on the analysis of like speeches, yeah, of political representatives, because in the media it was like in some issues which were not mentioned in the analysis of opinion polls, yeah. So this is also like quite like as a secondary, but still the task of this research, yeah. But I would agree with you that like for now, I have like mostly just like kind of supported what was previously mentioned in the previous research.
Okay, thank you. Marina.
Marina?
Yeah, thank you, colleagues. I finally found how to raise hand on smartphone. Yeah, thank you. I have a question. Not so long time ago, I've heard from linguists the phenomenon of semantic shifts. It's like when there is some word and in society or for a long time, during a long time or for some time period, the understanding of some words changes. I was wondering, like, is it possible or not to add, or does it make sense, to your opinion, to add some analysis of semantic shifts of some words for, because it seems to me like some words, they really changed for at least some period of time, their semantic meaning. For example, like in 2014, we had these вежливые люди, like how to translate, I don't know, polite people. And before that time, it was a completely different, there was the one and completely different meaning of this term or word, but at that period of time, that time added another one completely different to it.
Okay, thank you. So of course, when we're talking like about discourses, yeah, and like the meaning of the like this Russian special pass, yeah, and like special pass in general, we can see like the differences, what was the meaning and what was the discourse behind this special pass, like right now, in the beginning of 2000s, which was a little bit different as well. And also like 100 years ago, and like even earlier when we're talking about Zonderweg, yeah, that Elena Slavna mentioned. But yeah, I guess this would also be an interesting idea for the research, to look at how the meaning of this like special pass changed through time. But I guess this is just like the direction for like further research, probably. Thank you.
Right. It is maybe I'm not saying that this is the only way to develop or repair or somehow complement this parts of your analysis, but maybe it's a good idea to show how the public opinion polls demonstrate the whatever, I mean, maybe statistical representation of people who believe that Russia has its own special paths, and at the same time, if they somehow operationalize, I mean, explore what it means to have its special paths and where to these paths leads. Okay, Violetta, I think Violetta Maksudovna wants you to answer her question also in the chat.
Okay, yeah. So I guess the fifth one, yeah. Why US young researcher decided to choose that past period? Was it your purpose presented as a fresh modern thoughts of Raspberry political elite? So that was because actually, yeah, right now I'm presenting like the research which I conducted not like recently, yeah, but I want to just like elaborate on it a little bit and like refresh some data, and like maybe like rewrite this like paper as well. But the reason was, yeah, because also this was the research conducted like for the purpose of development, another one about like framing effects, and also about CDA, but not regarding use of critical theories. I wonder, have you tried to look at opposite research presentation of such official discourse in government's media? On the opposite research presentation. So I guess the question here is maybe about the sources, yeah, of information in the sixth question. So I was also focused on the analysis of TV state news pieces, because I was interested in so-called like official discourse, yeah, to use it as well in these like experimental design, because of course there are much more different discourses on sanctions and different discourses on how they can be like legitimized and explained or maybe challenged. But yeah, this was not just the purpose of my research. Okay, so do you use key terms as Russian special civilization, trust and support of citizens, etc., from your researcher's opinion, without verifying received data from research media, without attempts to understand the reasons? So the key terms, I'm not like, to be honest, I'm not quite understand like the seventh question as well. So is it like about key terms that I used like to search for the data, or like maybe you could explain it a little bit?
Okay, but anyway, thank you very much. While Violetta Maksudovna will a little bit rephrase her question number 7, maybe Linda could comment if you wish. Yes, please unmute yourself. Unmute.
There we go. Okay, the discussion was, I thought, very rich. I have a couple of suggestions that have more to do with the organization of the paper and clarifying your question. So as I was reading it at the beginning, it wasn't clear to me whether you were asking, is the government using media framing in an attempt to gain support for its policies, or is it succeeding in gaining that support? Now, eventually it became clear to me that your question was whether the government was using media framing to try to generate legitimacy. It seems to me that first you could make that question more clearly stated at the outset. And in some of the other information that you have there, and so set up your question at the outset in your conceptual frame, and then your empirical evidence. And I think after that, maybe some more discussion about evidence. First of all, evidence. I think that to make the paper, the paper would be much stronger if you, to some extent at least, address the issue of whether this framing analysis was effective in influencing people's opinions. Because, I mean, I haven't read a lot of this literature, but in comparison to other literature on media framing I've read, you really analyze a very elaborate kind of frame. I mean, not just, it's not a simple message. This is a multi-part message that is supposed to influence people's thinking on several different aspects of politics about sanctions. So it seems to me that one thing you could do is write a much longer, add a discussion section after you've presented the evidence and talk about, first of all, whatever evidence there is on the basis of existing opinion polls and other data, that these ideas that the idea is that this framing is present. You say it early on, but to talk a little more elaborately about the extent to which these frames, aspects of them are present in public opinion, in public conceptualizations. Maybe you could do a survey on that, or maybe you could just use evidence that's already out there from a variety of surveys, so that even if you can't, in a strictly methodologically strict way, answer the question about influence, you could bring to bear on it whatever evidence is available in the existing opinions and attitude literature. The other thing is, I was very interested in your reference to Kazun's paper, which I briefly read in Democratizatia, which is also about the question of sanctions, but it seemed to be a much more direct question about whether sanctions are having an effect on people's consumption, on their experiences, and there Kazun does find some public opinion data that relates back to that question, that says a remarkably high proportion of people seem to think that these sanctions haven't really damaged their consumption possibilities, even though on a sort of practical empirical level, they probably have. So I think you're asking a much more complicated question, and you're giving a much more complicated and nuanced elaboration of the framing, but maybe following that logic again, and maybe talking a little more about Kazun's paper. There may be others, but this one seems quite close to yours, which you acknowledge in addressing a similar issue, but on a different level of people's perceptions of the effects. So that's one thing. And I think the discussion of Kazun and of the information that is there about relevant attitudes should be moved to a discussion section and then hopefully elaborated. There was one piece of the that I didn't understand of the framing, and that is the distinction between the Crimea events, for example, and the natural desire to preserve Russia as a civilization. And like at one point you say the TV reporter said, these sanctions are not retribution for Crimea, they're a price for preserving our civilization. And that was partly to deflect criticism, any potential criticism, to say it's not the government's behavior that is causing these sanctions. It's something much more fundamental to preserving our identity. But somehow I don't quite see the distinction. That is, trying to, bring together the Russian lands. That seems to me that is a strategy for preserving the civilization, and that it is. And I didn't understand, and the reference, it comes up at several other points, but I didn't really understand the distinction between the government's behavior and preserving the civilization. It seemed to me that this particular behavior is very much part of the overall concept of preserving this nation and civilization. And I didn't, just conceptually, I didn't understand the attempt to distinguish them. I understand the claim that anything Russia does to preserve its civilization and its power is likely to bring to bring sanctions and negative reactions from the West. And actually, I mean, Obama illustrated that because he kept throwing more and more sanctions on Russia for various things, like this is the only way we have of showing we don't like what they're doing. And so I think the argument isn't wrong, but I still had trouble. Understanding the distinction between the behavior and the overall strategy. They seem to me, leaving aside any value judgments, they seem to me pretty much strongly connected. Elena asked, I thought her comments were very good, but also asked, what are you adding? I don't know the specific frame from Drobezheva that you used, but again, in comparison to other literature, it seems to me that you really do elaborate this framing, and it might be interesting to see if there's public opinion surveys, not only about whether that people believe there's a special path or a Russian civilization, but also whether they accept some of the other claims, some of the other frames about counter sanctions, so some of the other pieces of the frame that you elaborate. I think it would make it a stronger paper if you could come back to even evidence that relates to the effects, the effectiveness of the framing.
Okay, yeah, thank you for your suggestions. And of course, yeah, I guess that moving Anastasia Kazun's paper to this discussion section is actually quite a good idea, yeah. And maybe as well, like follow her, like her kind of like structure, yeah, to add maybe more about opinion polls, yeah, to compare maybe even in time, yeah, how this changed in the perception of people. I guess, yeah, I just didn't think about it actually, and I only used opinion polls in the beginning, yeah, to tell about some background. But I guess, yeah, this if I elaborate on it a little bit more, it will be also nice for the research. And also, yeah, about research question, yeah, I've been thinking to like maybe like change it a little bit as well. Okay, so thank you a lot for like all the questions. And also, yeah, I see in the chat, so you pick key terms and statistical explanation research position towards to these constructs with the benefits of Kremlin. Yeah, so I'm just like analyzing the data, and actually it is not in my focus to try to explain what are like the benefits of this kind of like discourse is, except for its like legitimization about which I'm talking like in general for like Russian government, yeah, but because I guess this is something more suitable, not for like an academic research, I would say. Yeah, so I guess I managed to answer to the 6 questions, and second 6 from critical analysis approach, not just description repetition, but critical look. So yeah, I actually hope that I made my like analysis like critical one, yeah, because I tried to somehow like deconstruct this discourse in Russian special past, yeah, but like I guess like I get this was kind of like the aim, yeah, maybe I did not manage to like fully like criticize it, yeah, maybe like from the position of critical approach, but I just like hope that I at least to some extent I managed to do it. Okay, so
Yes, thanks a lot,
everybody.
You are so great, and so you answered to the questions as you are defending already. So Linda, please, or Elena Stlano, we can conclude. Yeah.
Just one other thought. You talk about the fact that most framing has mostly been used in democratic countries. It might be interesting to, at some point, to just think about the comparison between its effectiveness in democratic versus non-democratic systems. There's quite a lot of evidence that framing can be very influential, even in democratic systems. I mean, I've been studying migration to Europe and the way in which the media, the European media, framed the migrants. I mean, sometimes the frames were humanitarian. These are poor people who are desperate and their children are dying. And that generated one set of responses. And then once there were terrorist attacks, the media tended to focus on all these migrants as presenting an existential threat to, you know, people's lives, and that had a huge impact. Or anyway, public opinion changed with the media. One can't say it was only the media, but I think media can be very powerful in different kinds of systems. And I don't know whether it would be possible to make comparisons, but it's just a thought.
Yeah, but I actually kind of saved it from this for the second part of the research when I was like more focused on the effects. Yeah, and in the context of media effects and framing effects, I like had this kind of like discussion. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of evidence that media framing greatly influences the ways in which people understand issues in democratic societies as well.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you.
Yes, of course, it would be great to somehow relate it with special parts. I mean, how it's understood by people, not just in very, very abstract ideological terms, but like we have our own parts in some more practical issues. Of course, it's well-known understanding of unique Russian culture, but what about welfare policy? What about the ideas of civil society development? Like we especially taking into account that there are various explanations of civil society also that are critical towards the Western, how to say, normative definitions, like there is only one ideal type of civil society and all other types should somehow conform to it. But there are also anthropological definitions and discursive definitions. So, I mean, it a little bit corresponds with the idea of the special parts. So, I mean, every society, every state has its special parts in some in some sense. Okay, thank you very much. I think it was very, very interesting and vivid and fruitful discussion. Big thanks to Linda, as usual. You conducted a new study in literature, in theoretical frameworks, and gave us, and especially to Polina, good comments, good advice. Thanks a lot to everybody who contributed.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you.
Everybody.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.